Well, good morning, everyone. We're here together with the Consulting Amigos. We've got a full complement of four of us here today. And glad to welcome back Ray, who's been gallivanting in Europe and Germany. And John has been gone as well. I mean, he was in Eastern Europe, I believe, right? So we've had some travelers. And Ed, where have you been?
To the beach.
To the beach. You're on the beach. There you are having. So Ed's been on the beach, and I've been working here by myself and without you guys. Okay, so today we're going to have an interesting topic, and that is what is the burden of government, taxes, regulation, et cetera, on small business. We won't be able to discuss everything, but we do have today a an example, and we're going to give you full disclosure. We pulled these stats from ChatGPT, so I guess you have to say that this has been artificially enhanced. I guess that's the new term. So but I think these are probably pretty good numbers because we've looked at these numbers before as a group, and they're gonna end up being, pretty much the same kind of thing, but organized maybe a little bit better than we have in the past, or a little bit different anyway. So let's see, here we go. Okay, as soon as that pops up, I think we'll be ready to get started here. I don't see it yet. Have you guys seen it? Did it come up?
There's just a line across my screen.
Okay, that somehow that didn't really do the job. Oh, there. How's that? There we go. Can you see that slide up there now?
There, now I can see it.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. It really helps if I don't have it off the screen. Yeah, because Zoom doesn't know what's off screen, so okay, so basically we're going to talk a little bit about the costs, and so here they are. Let's just kind of go through a couple of these things and see, and then we're going to chat about it. All of these gentlemen being very aware of paying taxes in small businesses. So federal, state, local taxes, about between 5 to 10%, meaning corporate, maybe property taxes, excise taxes, et cetera. Payroll taxes, 7 to 9% of payroll. So I think, John, you were questioning that.
Let's just
Um,
rearrange that and make it a percentage of revenue, which everything else is.
well, so you can see they're saying 3 to 4% of revenue.
Yeah, about
I
half.
think that's not quite right because it depends on how you calculate it. If the employer pays what is it, Ed, 6.5, 6.75%,
Correct. Yeah.
and then it's matched, you're really talking about 15.5, 16% total. The argument being that if that didn't go to the government, that we owners would be paying that as a salary. And so the prices, the fees, the salaries would be going up. And so that's the low side. 9% really a low ball number. Compliance is 2 to 6%. Of course, that depends on the category. Manufacturing, I think probably an obvious one. It's going to be a little bit higher on regulation than others. Healthcare and employee benefits, 6 to 10%. Now, that's a little bit surprising to me. It's been a while since I've paid attention to uh, employee benefits. Ed, you see this a lot more than I do. Is that a rational number? I used to plan, from 2 to 3% for
No,
health. Yeah.
it's close to 10%.
Is it really 10%?
Yeah.
Okay. Other government related fees from a half to point and a half, leaving, and then they're also saying after tax 5 to 10%. So that's basically, ballpark. We've studied that here, and according to I believe that was the Independent Federated Business report that we looked at that showed that profits are up and down from zero on a constant basis, really looks like there's just very marginal. So for the very small, for business, if you count the amount that they take out for themselves, maybe it is 5 to 10%, but net profit, that feels high to me. But I think the point here is just to say, okay, what is that burden? Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button there. So if we take, say, an average, say 9% and 9, that's 18, maybe 22, you're saying up to 10% is just 32, maybe between 32 and 34%. That's what it's costing a business to be in business, 34%. So what I just sort of like to kick around a little bit is if taxes are running 34, that's a third of our revenue. If taxes are running at that high, when will it be too much? When will it put people out of business? How does that affect growth in the future? Can businesses increase the prices enough to cover a third of that? If they didn't have a third to pay, would they be able to reduce their prices by a third? A lot of questions there, a lot of different opportunities to kick this around. So I thought we'd just kick this around a little bit and kind of see what you individually think about this whole issue of finally hitting an overburden. When do we finally kill that golden goose? Ed, you had mentioned earlier that we have a great example right here in Southern California because of government intervention in a new way, and that is forcing a very, very large minimum wage on restaurants. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, well, and when you look at your summary of the various taxes, that extra cost isn't included in there,
Mm-mm.
except maybe I guess it would be regulation, I guess, but it's a big number, and a lot of companies, smaller companies, are having difficulty making a profit now based upon what they have to pay their employees. So it's forcing them either to reduce the number of employees, which is just the opposite of what government thinks is going to happen, right?
Right.
Yeah, so they're going to have fewer employees, which that means they're going to invest in more technology. They're going to try to get the customer to receive less customer service because there'll be fewer employees. So that definitely is an issue because I think it's really hard to pass on the extra fees because there's competitors, and competitors are always going to try to find a way to do it for less amount of money. And so you're kind of limited. And there's people, the consumer is only willing to spend so much more. It gets to the point, well, if the cost is so high for them to go out and have a dinner or something, they'll just eat at home. So a lot of these things impact the business. And when it gets to the point that you're not making any money and you're working your tail off 60 to 80 hours a week, it becomes a point that you say, it just isn't worth it anymore.
Mm. So these restaurants maybe were making 6 or 7%, say before COVID, before this new law, and of course to add to the burden of COVID, the state of California and their infinite wisdom in business prowess imposed this new very high minimum wage of $20 an hour for every employee right after COVID. And it's sort of like they didn't get recovered yet, and they had this new law. Plus, it's going to continue to go up because the state has put together a commission that watches this, and they have taken out the minimum wage completely from the decision of the owner. They simply must start everybody at $20. I have a 20-year-old grandson who does the, beginning job that you can do. He's making $20 an hour. He's got more money than he ever imagined. And has got a new truck and, just living the life of Riley. Of course, he's not going to be able to do that as a little older guy. So I'm trying to get him to save more, but it's
Good luck.
always, that's
Good
always
luck.
the problem. Yeah, that's always the problem. The truck versus putting it in the bank. So it's only the really wise one that's actually put the money away as in driving a little bit older vehicle. So I mean, so I guess what you could say, Ed, is that in a case like that, if you're, I don't know, what was it before? Was it $16 an hour maybe, or was it $12 an hour? What was the minimum wage? I mean, I remember when we were working for the manufacturer together, gosh, weren't we talking about the entry level at $12 an hour 5 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, it's gone up a lot.
So
It's gone up a lot, yeah.
I mean, what is that? 25, 30% increase. Yeah, that's more than that. That's 50% increase from 12 to 20, $6. Wow, 33% increase. That's a big, big number. So if you don't raise your prices, increase your production, sales, or margin, then the math puts you out of business, and you went from 7% profit to 2 or 3% loss. One single wave of the wand from Sacramento or whatever, whatever state
Speaking of
capital.
speaking of Sacramento, as I do when we talk to what it costs to be in business, I quite often reflect on New Zealand, and Kiwis are very creative. Have you ever heard of the FBT tax? It's an acronym for Fringe Benefit Tax,
Mm,
soon to be repeated in California, I'm quite certain.
yeah.
But the purpose is the FBT is paid by employers on non-cash benefits. And so now we've got a little audit that goes on things that maybe a desk or maybe a car, maybe whatever it is that we're extending to our employees, but there's going to be a tax on that. Um,
So if you used to get a free meal, now you have to pay taxes on behalf of the free meal you gave to your employee.
So here's the deal. The bottom line is you're going to come up with the names of these things so that anything and everything can be
Well,
taxed.
yeah, absolutely.
And that's just so the tipping point, I think it's a psychological one, is when we realize that the government in power is not interested in leaving business to be profitable or have some retained earnings, as they say down under. But really, all of the retained earnings are going to be retained by the government because the government fundamentally is a better use of that money and can actually spend it more wisely and with a better stewardship than
Yes,
small
that's
businesses. That's
correct.
the tipping point.
Correct.
And I'm
Well,
not sure whether we're here or there, but I think it's pretty close.
Well, I think as Ed suggests, we're seeing restaurants going out of business at a pretty good clip right now, and it'll be interesting to see if anybody can ever recognize that or if anybody cares. But we had the increase in inflation, which pushed the food costs up. In a fine dining restaurant, that's 35 to 40%. So that percentage went up by 20%, 25%. And then on top of it, you've got labor, which is another 25 to 30%. So you can see how both of those things combined makes it nearly impossible to eat a meal at a reasonable price. I know for sure that we've cut down going out to eat. And it's not because we can't afford it. It's just because it doesn't feel like the value quotient is there anymore. It's just too much money and you just don't enjoy it. It's if it happens to be noisy or if there's not something really special about it, like it's the only great steak in town or something like that, tend to do it less frequently. I would say that we've cut our restaurant frequency down by 2/3 compared to 4 years ago. 2/3. So,
So
there's money that is out that no longer is in the economy, and we're spending it at the store buying filet mignon instead of hamburger at a restaurant. The value's a lot better. I know how to cook a filet mignon, so it's, pretty decent. And so you just enjoy it at home, have a few friends over, and you've got a decent experience. And so there's the problem really is that people get to a threshold. It doesn't matter if there's a competitor that can do it for a few cents less. The few cents less is still too high. You go into McDonald's, you got a couple of kids, you walk out, you spend $45. You used to be able to go to McDonald's, well, I mean, a long time ago for $1, but you used to be able to do it for $8, $7, $6 a person, and you walk out for half of that, and so it's a shock. People are in shock. Now, when we begin to talk about the other segment of the population, which is 2/3 of the population that are currently up against the wall, they have no choice. They can't go to the restaurant because they just don't have any excess money to spend. So there's the tipping point for restaurants. But what about other businesses? What is this taxation doing to everybody else? And I suppose you could throw on tariffs. We haven't talked about tariffs. But you throw tariffs on top of that, you're talking about the government consuming well over 1/3 of everything in the economy. You're all dumbfounded, I can tell. This is an unusual circumstance.
I was
Well,
just trying to figure out what I'm getting for that third.
Well,
So that's what
it's
left me
becoming,
confused.
Yeah.
we looked at that slide a couple months ago. It shows that profitability for small businesses aren't really going up. It's going down for the last 50
Yeah.
years or so. And then when you start including all these increased costs of doing business, it's really putting a strain on businesses to stay in business. And quite frankly, a lot of these businesses are probably not making any money at all, but they're so used to doing what they're doing, they just keep operating. And sooner or later, they're going to find out, why spend all this time and effort and capital on doing something that isn't making any money?
Yeah.
There's no incentive to stay in business.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Let me put another spin on that, Ed. I mean, I just didn't want to work for the man. I didn't
Yeah.
care who that man was. I was going to work on my own, and I think there are a lot of us out here who are really independently minded, and profit is as important to us as our sense of independence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd fall in that category. I mean, out of my entire life, I spent a total of, maybe seven years working for other people, and that was as a consultant, as a result of working alone, that made me eligible to have that particular job. But I soon was ready to move on and do my own thing again. And so I really understand that, and I would certainly look for something to do myself, most likely if I was in that position again. But you can't keep going down a rabbit hole forever. So it forces these people to go into sales or commission or some other quasi-independent kind of a thing to simply try to make a living. And I suppose they could go get a job, but I think you're right, Ray. A lot of people don't leave because they can't. They don't really have an alternative, and they just milk it as long as they can, just hoping that it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you get a turnaround, and people, they learn, and people are very adaptable, and good independent business people find alternatives. That's how they stay in business. They find other ways to do the same thing.
Right. I would say for the four of us, John, you and I have all been independent for a long time.
Yeah.
Ed worked as a CPA for a company most of your adult career. Isn't that right, Ed?
That's true for the most
Yeah.
part.
It's not good or bad, but I think, the other three of us, wanted to go out on our own, and we were willing to sacrifice to make that happen.
But
And
when you get to the point where you're working 80 hours a week and you're risking all of your family capital, and you actually look at your financial statements, which
So
could be
What
a
are financial
aha
statements?
moment, and find out you're not making any money.
You're right.
yeah, so
Barely
there is an
in your
interesting,
business.
sorry, there's another interesting twist is that I quite often say that the guys who are in small business, people say, well, you're in small business, do what you want, you got enough time, and that you end up, I think, spending more hours than you do in a 40-hour job.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
the real differential is that in the event of failure, you lose your life savings. Everything you've got is up in jeopardy. Now, contrary that to somebody in public service, they lose the company, a guy who's a policeman. So he loses the badge and he loses his income. And the car that he was driving goes back to where it was, but nothing else changes.
Mhm.
What we lose everything. We stand at loss of everything. And if you're in civic service working for the government, you just walk away and you
Mhm.
go on unemployment. We don't get to walk
Usually,
away.
usually a very nice pension, if you've
Yeah.
got
Yeah,
a
I'm
little,
sorry, we don't get to walk away.
no, no. And many times small business people leave with huge burdens. I had the fortune to leave a business, a partnership, and walk away from a particular business because I saw that it wasn't going anywhere. My partners did not see that. They had the rose-colored glasses, and they just were ready to make a huge amount of money, et cetera, et cetera. So we separated amicably, and it was all good. And then about a year later, I happened to stop in and say, "Hi, how you guys doing?" Find out that the things were so tough that they had not been paying their withholding tax.
Mm.
And, I guess there's 6 or 7 employees, something like that. So, I mean, it had mounted up. And then you add the penalties and all that. And,
Ugh.
that can end up being a really nasty number. So basically, by the time the whole thing was said and done, the primary guy I mean, several other people left realizing what was happening. And so it was one guy and one other guy. And basically, he ended up walking away owing about $40,000 to the tax man. And as you know, they don't let you out of that. You know,
I want to share a story that's related to this house. Um, we were trying to buy this, and the owner was very reluctant. I didn't know what was going on, but when I spoke to him personally, I avoided both of our realtors, and I just went up and talked to him. He owed the state $400,000 in back payroll taxes because he hadn't paid him as a construction guy.
oh, oh,
And so how I got the house, I said, look, here's the deal. You're not going to get anything. When we close this, I'm going to give you a check for $5,000. He said,
mhm.
just a minute. His wife was 8 months pregnant, right?
Oh,
2 minutes later, he came back. He says, you got a deal.
wow.
So when it was all said and done, all he got was that check I gave him for 5,000.
And that's because somehow nobody could figure out how to attach that, or they would have.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it was like you were saying, Ron. He just refused to pay his
yeah,
unemployment insurance, saying, "Hey, it's not a problem." Well,
yeah,
it was a problem.
yeah. The government stuff, you've got your student loans and you've got
Mm.
your payroll taxes. I think those are probably the two things where you cannot ever get out of them. And I'll tell you, it wasn't that big of a sum. Of course, this was some years ago, so it was probably 80, $90,000. But it was he himself who had to figure out how to pay it. And I can tell you, it ruined his life. He
Yeah.
got a divorce. He didn't see his son anymore. He was going job to job, trying to figure out how to make money, taking risky jobs that were hard to do, thinking he had to make huge amount of money to get out of the hole. He never did. It ruined his life. And so, that's what can happen if you don't stay up on your taxes.
Well, I think isn't that another aspect of the cost of government on small business? I mean,
You
we
bet.
just talked about two businesses that were totally destroyed by their inability or the refusal to pay the taxes that were
Mhm.
due when they were due.
Yeah, right. And isn't it ironic that around here you can steal, I don't know what the number is, $600 legally nowadays, every day or something, and yet somebody who's an honest, hardworking business person, just things don't happen to go the right way, and they can end up burdened with a large amount of money for the rest of their lives. There's something seriously wrong with our penal system slash debtor system slash reward system. Really seriously wrong. That's certainly no incentive to get more small business people into the market, is it?
When you run a small business, you also have legal liability for not doing something in accordance with the
Yeah.
regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a big deal. And it can be a lot of money. So if you go out of business, you still might be sued for something you did 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the government makes it easier, it seems like easier for legal folks to sue you for non-compliance of some minor rule or whatever. And you're
Right.
stuck with the tab. So you lose your life fortune, and then you may have to pay money on some type of a legal liability that you weren't anticipating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
It's a tough
that
deal.
raises an interesting question, Ed. There's been a lot of questions. A lot of the payments we make are related to a lack of tort reform. I mean, there's a lot of money going into the legal system instead of going to the owners of companies. Do you guys
Mhm.
have that same sense?
Um, I can't, yeah, I'm not sure I quite understand what you mean. You're saying would not get in tort reform, that's true. And you're suggesting that money is going where again? Kind of restate that, Ray.
Well, what I'm saying is that, the example I was using here of this house, right? He had a $400,000 debt and couldn't get out from underneath it. And as a consequence, his life was, for all intents and purposes, ruined, So
Mhm.
um, he tried to avoid his legal responsibility. And as a consequence, he lost everything. I mean,
Yeah.
sad as it was. I guess my point here is that how much of what we're talking about in terms of money is going into paying those sorts of debts instead of being used to grow a business.
Oh, well, boy, I don't know. There are probably a lot of ways you could look at it. I mean, for one thing, certainly the government might reconsider, the various governments might reconsider their, penalties and so forth and interest and that kind of thing based on people taking some risks. But in addition to that, yeah, you're certainly right. There are people who would give it another go. But if they don't, if they lose their house, they've lost everything that they
Yeah.
could use for raising money. Now they have to go to family and friends, uh, rob a bank, in order to be able to find the capital to kind of restart again. Because a lot of these guys that you brought up, Ray, they're going to be small business people no matter what, and some of them have been very successful along the way, and then something happens that causes them to lose it. So, this particular gentleman you talk about, he might have had a very successful business.
Yeah.
I mean, $400,000, that's a lot of payroll tax. That's a lot of people. And it may be that he picked up 2 or 3 jobs and realized that he had to remedy this, that he could have worked his way out of that if he's doing several $1 million a year in business. He might have gotten out of it. But that went past the break point. You see there,
Mhm.
he went past that tipping point where they were coming after him and he had no place to turn. And so he ended up having to really, dump the whole thing and probably never did you ever run into him ever again? Did he?
No,
Yeah.
no, I don't know where he is. Like I
Yeah.
said, sadly, his wife was 3 weeks from delivery when he forfeited the house.
Yeah. Wow.
John, I was going to ask you, obviously you left New Zealand very much because of the issues we're talking about. Is it still 34% in New Zealand or is it higher?
It's higher. Well, I don't. I was trying to get an estimation of what it is today, and I couldn't come up with an accurate one in the last hour or so. Uh, but in the 80s, it was in the 50% area, and part of it
Hmm.
is you got to look at the combined tax on a business that includes all the cost of the resale, the payroll, etc. So if you wrap it together, it was just over 50%. It's come down considerably, and a part of the issues with the government used tariffs in the 80s and 90s to control the development of business within New Zealand. They actually used high tariffs on overseas imports to give the local businesses a step up. But in the long run, it had a completely negative influence, because over a period of time, companies were established on a falsehood of high tariffs of the cost of goods coming in, and they started then creating inferior products to that which could be produced in the higher volume countries. So over a period of a decade or so, it worked up to be very negative. And there's many examples of automobiles that were made and white goods that were made, washers and dryers and refrigerators. And a couple of companies came out of that just simply because they were very, very, very determined. But it was like the survival of the fittest. The guys who came through were Six Sigma performers. Most of the businesses, in fact, they took tariffs off the country in the 80s. You can go back and do some research on this. Over 40% of small businesses went out of business in the next 5 years. It was the most colossal repositioning of small business that was recorded. It's an economic textbook story if you go look at it.
Wow.
Are you suggesting that maybe the tariffs could have the same impact on our economy?
I believe the use of tariffs as a bully pulpit to get people to do what they want to do is a very, very short-term solution. If you keep on repeating it, you will end up with devastating the core foundational investment in society that businesses have. So I think it's a very negative thing, short-minded and negative. It's a wonderful thing if you're the person controlling it, but if it doesn't work, you're in deep doo-doo, and you're just back to square one.
Have you guys seen the ad that the Canadians have been running?
Yeah. Yeah, they've got a little bit of heartburn over this stuff, don't
Yeah,
they?
But the
I mean,
irony is,
they're running Reagan's words.
yeah, but the irony is that a lot of these countries have had tariffs in place for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I think there's the difference. You can put a tariff in place for a 30-year term or a 20-year term to give a long-term incentive for a business. And a classic one for New Zealand was automobile. They put 40% tariffs on some automobiles. Well, there was an incentive, obviously, for somebody locally to try to make a New Zealand-made car. You got 2 million people. It's really difficult to do that without importing the majority of parts, which you've then got to get tariff exemption for to use. I mean, it's just becomes a political nightmare.
Did they ever build a car?
Oh yeah, they did. They built a couple of versions of off-roaders that were hoping to get to a car status, and they were not particularly good and not particularly valuable. Ingenious, some of them, but you know.
Yeah. Well, and of course, keep in mind that an awful lot of the reason that the tariffs are going on is not to be punitive. Of course, it is in some cases. I think when we take a look at what's happened in China, I think that's pretty clear. There's some punitive action there too for fentanyl and other things. But regarding Canada, I mean, they have had tariffs that were so high on milk products for decades and decades and decades that our farmers really could not sell into that country at all. Yet we were allowing them to bring their dairy products into this country, for just a few percentage points. So, I mean, we're talking about free trade. Free trade includes tariffs that are equal. And I believe we're going to end up with tariffs that are more equal than they have been in the past. So that's where
I'm hoping that it ends up that way.
Yeah, I think we will. He does use a bully pulpit. He's a business guy. He understands leverage, and he's getting the things that he wants done because he knows he's only got 3.5 years to do them. And frankly, there's not another perhaps man in the world that could do it so fast and so efficiently. So he's in a pretty unique place with a whole lot of personal power. given to him by our government to do that. But I believe that the right thing will happen. But that doesn't mean that's going to help small business. It means lots of dislocation in a lot of different ways. If you happen to be just on the wrong side of that, like in New Zealand, you're building something where you were maybe were protected, and then you're not protected. Well, now you're no longer price competitive, or the reverse happens, which is what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to protect industries, and then the consumer has to pay more. So,
Yeah.
it's sort of like it's a little bit like sticking your finger in a balloon, I mean, it kind of pops out somewhere else, and you don't really know where that is for a while. You
Yeah.
don't know which businesses are gonna get chewed up as a result. So it's a risky, unsettling business. And I would say to add that together with what we've known and talked about in terms of profitability of businesses. And then we've added on top of that the liability that you could potentially have even after your business is over and gone. And based on 34%, and if it only takes a little bit more, and because I think we've seen it with restaurants, it takes a little bit more, and we've hit the tipping point. We're very close to it, very, very close to that tipping point. And so what does that mean for small business? That's the kind of the question is, okay, you're thinking about getting into business or you're wanting to stay in business. How do you think about that now? It gives me a little bit different perspective on how the strategy should unfold.
Well, I think if you look at it from, as opposed to a micro level, a macro level, how
Mhm.
close are we to another recession? Typical or similar to 1929.
Mm.
I mean, it's hard to tell. I'm not sure. I don't want to be a crying wolf here, but I think there's a potential for that in the near future.
Yeah. I think you're talking about a depression, and I think we're closer to a depression than we are a recession.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're past a little recession. Some
Yeah.
people say we're already in a recession, and certainly 2/3 of our consumers are in their own recession. They're losing buying power. They're in their own recession now.
Right. Right.
It's the people with money to spend that are propping up the consumer economy, and look at all the investment going into business, trillions and trillions of dollars going into business. That some people will do construction and some people will do, various things, but for the most part, our big giant megalith companies are going to be doing the chips and the wiring and the networking and the buildings and the power plants. There are jobs there, but I don't know how many small businesses are going to be able to participate in that.
No, exactly.
Now, in defense of our current president, perhaps the real issue at the end of the day is, first of all, you can't really use tariffs as a bully pulpit unless you happen to be one of the big dogs in the fight. When you're a small dog like New Zealand, it's a little difficult to do it.
Yeah,
When you're a big dog, you can maybe get away with it a little bit.
yeah.
But the real issue behind this, I think, is a 30-year plan that China has been working on to take control of mines in
Hmm.
South Africa
Hmm.
and in the South Pacific. Now,
Hmm.
this is something I've talked about a little bit in the past, but the biggest export from Australia, or the biggest country of export, is China. China has now invested in probably 10 major countries in the South Pacific, given them freely for port access and airport access. And they are in the middle of taking advantage of their mining community because they can bring in the heavy equipment. And in
Mm.
South Africa, the
Mm.
largest mines are controlled by Chinese companies. Tanzania almost became a country that was a puppet Chinese state.
Yeah.
And so, what China has been doing, not for 3 years of a presidency or 4 years of a presidency or 5 years, they've been doing this for decades.
Mhm.
Yes.
And we are naive and behind
Mhm.
the gun on this
Mhm.
because right now, the real issue with tariffs, when you come right down to it, is called rare earth materials.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And that's where the game is
Yeah.
because we don't have them and China does. And China actually doesn't have them. They've negotiated for them over 20 years.
Well, and they do the
Yeah, I think,
refining
but
of it. They're doing like up to 98% of refining on certain things like magnets, for instance. And that has to do with their ability to their metallurgy capabilities. And we haven't done that. We've let
You know,
them.
it's
no,
rare earth is
Yeah,
neodymium core products. There's
yeah,
several. Russia used to own the majority of the mines that produce rare earth until there were huge discoveries made in Africa. Um, so yeah, China and Russia together have control of the majority of rare earth materials.
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I was going to say, I remember 10 years ago when I went to Jamaica. China, as you said, John, has been involved in what they call the infrastructure of these third world countries for decades.
Their
There was a road across
Belt and Road
from
system, right?
Montego Bay to Kingston, and it was built exclusively by the Chinese.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they made it very clear to everybody who built it, so that people would know that they were benefiting from Chinese efforts.
yeah,
So it's not an anti-Chinese statement, but it's
No,
you got to look at the thing. Vanuatu, formerly the New Hebrides, the largest seaport in the South Pacific, was voluntarily cleaned up and built deeper to accommodate the largest cruise ship in the world by China in
yeah,
2011, 2012. And then they went and put about $100 million into the a link to the airport. Oh, which by the way, they also improved to be the largest airport in the South Pacific area. Now, I don't know whether you remember, but back in the 40s, a certain American company and the Seabees actually developed both of those things,
yeah,
hmm,
New Hebrides.
yeah, yeah.
So you look at it and you go, well, why are they doing that?
because they're smart.
Because
Well,
they're very smart.
they're long
Yeah, no,
term.
I
Yeah,
think one of the challenges we in America has is this sense that somehow we're the only ones that can figure these things out. And while we were busy puffing up our chests, the Chinese have been slowly but surely capturing the world.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
it's not as
not
though
with
there aren't.
guns, but simply by doing things to make
Right.
life easier for the people that they're supporting.
Well, and Japan did it before them, and Korea did it in between them. So I mean, it's
Yeah,
not as though there aren't people who can come along and do some very innovative things. It really helps if you have a model so you can steal the plans as well.
that's
So,
true.
and there's no problem with them doing that. We don't have any patent protections really, and
Well,
so
I think, and another thing, if this makes sense, guys, we somehow tout our own um, civilization as being the end all be all, and we forget that China's been around for 5,000 years, and a very, very successful civilization for most of that time.
yeah, yeah, that is true.
But I think it's
Okay.
very true that China takes care of China, just like the United States is trying to take care of the United States. And
Absolutely.
the bottom line is the more business that we can generate in our own country rather than outsourcing it, there's going to be a lot of potential opportunities for small business, in my opinion.
Well, and that's a good point, and one that maybe we can just slightly elaborate as we close up here, and that is that change in economic systems. And I don't think we want to say it quite like that. Economic changes where the rules change a little bit, or with tariffs, et cetera, or favorable rulings, et cetera, do have a tendency to not only be negative but positive. They're positive for somebody. When payroll got to be so difficult that no small business wanted to mess around with it anymore, payroll companies came along and, now you've got ADP, a giant another corporation doing payroll. So there are opportunities. So in your business, look for those. Where are those opportunities that you can take advantage of? You got to be more creative. You got to work harder. You've got to be smart. You have to know business. A lot of the principles that we teach right here, you need to know all those things. But it doesn't mean just because things are maybe close to the tipping point, it doesn't mean you can't think about new products with bigger and higher margins. I'm working with a very successful company right now and we're looking at 3, 4, 5 years. And what are we focused on? We are focused on finding ways to increase margin without increasing the retail price. How do you do that? That's not an easy problem to solve.
Right.
And we're looking years out to be able to do this, realizing that competition is going to be higher, taxes are going to be higher, delivery costs are going to be higher, employee costs are going to be higher. Everything's going to be higher. We have to find a way to do margin. But right now, we're getting a little pushback on price. So we've got to mitigate that. So let's think that through very carefully and get creative. So like you have to get creative here and start thinking about some of these problems in new ways. Those are opportunities for brand new businesses to start up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Well, I was just thinking there's a metaphor that we've all seen of a person digging a hole in the ground, and you're saying, hey, stop digging, and the other side is, well, I can't stop digging. If I stop digging, I won't have, I'll get flooded out.
yeah, right.
So it's in small business, it's really sometimes very difficult to stop doing what you're doing, to do strategic planning, as Ed would say.
Well, it is hard. And of course, that's why you put your 8 hours in and then you go home and you do your strategic planning and your payroll and
Yeah.
you do all the rest of the stuff that needs to get done too. So, well, okay, good place to leave this. Thank you, gentlemen. Interesting conversation. And we'll have more to say about this tipping point, I think, here in over some of the next sessions. We will see you next time.